The Cleveland Browns are a really weird team to get a read on going into this year. You look at the talent they have one of the best rosters in the NFL. You have a top 10 offensive line. You have an elite secondary. Deshaun Watson, he looked a little rusty when he was coming back from that lengthy suspension that he had to serve. And this is a team that I think is good enough to compete for a Super Bowl, but also they have a good possibility of winning only 7 to 8 games this year. Like, this is a really weird team. Deshaun Watson, I still believe that he's one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL. I still will consider him to be a top 10 quarterback. I'm not going to let one rusty season define him. You got to remember that he didn't play the majority of last year, so when he came back, of course, he was going to be a little rusty, trying to get the chemistry and timing down pat with his new teammates. I do expect him to bounce back in a major way this year. You have Kareem Hunt, who's gone, but he's going to be replaced by Jerome Ford, who's going to be backing up Nick Chubb. I believe that Jerome Ford is going to have a really good season for the Cleveland Browns behind Nick Chubb. At wide receiver, you have Amari Cooper. You traded for Elijah Moore. You also have a young rookie who I'm really high on, and Cedric Tillman, who I had the first round grade on coming out of this past year's draft. And this defense, when you look at the secondary, is one of the best in the NFL. When you talk about top 10 cornerbacks, I don't think Denzel Ward gets brought up enough in that conversation. Like, this guy is the definition of lockdown. Then you have Juan Thornhill, who you're going to be bringing in at free safety, which was a weakness for you last year. The concerns that I have with the Browns mainly lies with the coaching. I'm not a big believer in Kevin Stefanski. This dude, after 2020, his coaching kind of got worse. And you can say, well, he had Baker Mayfield at quarterback who regressed the season after, which is understandable. And then last year, you had to wait for Deshaun Watson to get done with that suspension so he could come on the field and play for you. But this is a make or break year for Kevin Stefanski. If the Browns don't make it to the postseason, there's a very high chance that Kevin Stefanski ends up getting fired after this season is over. This Browns team is really talented. They're loaded at almost every single position. You bring in new defensive coordinator Jim Schwartz, who is one of the better defensive minds in the game. And earlier, he talked about how he wanted to be able to rotate guys in and out on the interior defensive line, which explains why they spent a lot of money on the interior defensive line, such as bringing in Tristan Hill, Maurice Hurst. You give Dalvin Tomlinson a really big contract, and then you trade for Zadarius Smith, who's going to be another good option rushing the quarterback on the opposite side of Myles Garrett. I don't really know about the linebacker position outside of JOK, but it's not like you need fantastic linebacker play in order to have a great defense. It's just that the run defense for the Browns has to be way better than what it was last season. And you look at this division. This is the toughest division in the NFL. You have the Baltimore Ravens and the Cincinnati Bengals, who both are pretty much premier Super Bowl contenders. Then you have the Pittsburgh Steelers, who have one of the better young rosters in the NFL. The Cleveland Browns, they haven't finished above Pittsburgh in this division in the last 3 decades? I can't remember the last time the Cleveland Browns finished above Pittsburgh in the NFC North. And with this division being so close together in talent, I mean, there's not really a large transparency between the Ravens, the Bengals, the Steelers, and the Browns. They're just about at neck and neck in terms of roster composition and the talent that they have. You probably can say that the Browns have a better team than Pittsburgh, but Pittsburgh still has the best coach in this division, and Mike Tomlin. And I think coaching may be the reason why Cleveland ends up not being able to make it to the playoffs this year. Like, let's just be honest. Kevin Stefanski hasn't really proven much as a head coach in the NFL outside of his first year with this organization. So the jury is still out on Kevin Stefanski and how good of a coach he actually is. And for this year, you have no more excuse if you're Kevin Stefanski. Your defensive coordinator is now set. You have Deshaun Watson, who's going to be in playing for the whole entire season, week 1 to week 17. So if the Cleveland Browns don't make it to the postseason this year, man, I don't really know if Kevin Stefanski ends up returning next year. And if you're a Browns fan, you have every reason to expect this team to not only make it to the playoffs, but to make a deep playoff run as well. This is a team who you probably could consider being a dark horse Super Bowl contender. I've been talking with my guy Juice, and he's been saying how the Browns are one of the most underrated teams going into this NFL season. And I definitely understand why. The talent is there at every single position. There's not really too many significant holes that the Browns have. They have tons of depth on the offensive line. They got guys who can get it done at receiver for Deshaun Watson. You have your franchise guy. You have an elite secondary. You have Myles Garrett, one of the best defensive players in the league. And now you're going to give him some additional help by trading for Darius Smith. There is absolutely zero excuses for Kevin Stefanski this year to not have the Cleveland Browns playing in the postseason this year. Their schedule is pretty tough given the fact that they're playing in one of the hardest divisions in the NFL. But if we're judging the Cleveland Browns based on a talent standpoint, they have one of the top 10 most talented rosters in the league going into this season. For the Cleveland Browns, this is a really hard team to get a read on. Their floor is 7 to 8 wins, and their ceiling possibly could be AFC Conference Championship, potentially the Super Bowl. That's how weird it is when you're trying to evaluate this Cleveland Browns team. The talent's there, but you don't know if the coaching is going to be there. And even if you have a talented team, if you don't have a good coach, especially in a division that's this tough, like the AFC North, you're not really going to go too far. So if Cleveland doesn't make it to the playoffs, I don't think it's going to be because they don't have the talent, but I think it's going to be more of an indication that Kevin Stefanski isn't the guy. So the Cleveland Browns, man, this is the NFL's biggest mystery team going into this season. You don't really know what the hell this team is going to do. They could win 7 games, or they could go to the AFC Championship and possibly the Super Bowl. It's really hard to get a read on the Cleveland Browns going into the 2023 NFL season.